We are going to take you live to the White House now, where John Kirby is speaking after a number of World Central Kitchen aid workers were killed in Gaza. Let's listen in live.
Look, they've already said this was on them, and they're doing this investigation. We obviously want to make sure that that investigation gets completed and is as transparent as possible. And as I said in my opening statement, that there's accountability to be held here.
One quick question on China. What was the president's message to the president when it comes to Chinese misinformation campaigns or any effort by the Chinese government or people associated with the Chinese government to interfere with the 2024 election?
I would just say that we've been clear consistently, even going back to the November meeting in California, about our concerns over our own election security and efforts by certain actors, including some from the PRC, to affect that.
So there was no new message in this conversation?
I don't have a new message to read out to you today.
Thanks, Admiral. On the death of those World Central Kitchen aid workers, which includes one American who was killed, Netanyahu's reaction was, quote, "It happens in war." What is your reaction to that comment from Netanyahu?
I don't think it'd be useful for me to get into a tit-for-tat here with the Prime Minister of Israel from the podium. We've been very clear about our expectations for this investigation. We noted that the Prime Minister said himself there will be an investigation. So has his military said that. We look forward to that investigation being thorough and swiftly done. And as I said, that it'll be transparent, the results of it, and that if there's accountability that needs to be had, that it will be had.
But how can you take Netanyahu at his word? As Nancy was saying, this was a deconflicted zone. They had marched their car. They had even coordinated their movements with the IDF.
Yeah, and as I said in my opening statement, obviously, setting aside this incident, because this isn't the first one, there are issues of deconfliction that clearly need to be fleshed out and improved.
So how can the U.S. continue to send aid to Israel without any conditions? Yes, they have a right to...
We're not sending aid to Israel. We're sending aid into Gaza, and that's...
Weapons. How can the U.S. continue to send military aid
military
to
assistance.
Israel without any conditions? Is there no red line that can be crossed?
You know, we've had this discussion, you and me, quite a bit from up here. They're still under a viable threat of Hamas. We're still going to make sure that they can defend themselves, and that 7th of October doesn't happen again. That doesn't mean that it's a free pass, that we look the other way when something like this happens, or that we aren't and haven't since the beginning of the conflict urged the Israelis to be more precise, to be more careful, and quite frankly to increase the amount of humanitarian assistance that gets in. You know, I haven't been asked about it yet, but I expected I would be. You know, there was a discussion just yesterday with our Israeli counterparts about Rafah. Now, this one was done virtually. We expect it'll be an in-person meeting here in a week's time or so. But the whole reason to have that meeting was to talk about our concerns over a major ground operation in Rafah and to present viable alternatives for them to be more precise and more targeted. So the idea that we're some plastic graveyard here and we're not paying attention to the civilian casualties or the civilian suffering is just not true.
Right, but these are verbal urgings, verbal commitments. There's no other incentive besides the urging.
I know you want us to hang some sort of condition over their neck, and what I'm telling you is that we continue to work with the Israelis to make sure that they are as precise as they can be, and that more aid's getting in, and we're going to continue to take that approach.
John, I just wanted to follow up. Do you guys have confirmation of the nationalities of the victims who were killed in the strike, and that one was a U.S. Canadian national?
I can confirm that one was a dual national American citizen, but I couldn't speak with authority about the nationalities of all of those. And as I understand it, I mean, there could be additional casualties coming in terms of the count. I just don't know.
And do you know if there's been any outreach to the family of that dual national citizen from the White House?
The State Department has done some initial outreach, and I would fully expect you'll see outreach from us at the appropriate time.
Thanks, Green. Thanks, Admiral. Does the White House accept Prime Minister Netanyahu's explanation that this incident was unintentional, as he put it?
I think the investigation will bear that out.
Sir, do you think that given these circumstances, is there a role for some kind of a protective force for aid workers given the threat of widespread famine and concerns about we've already discussed the the J-lock coming in and so forth. Is there a role that could be considered to try to protect aid workers with a neutral party security force?
That protective force ought to be the IDF, Kelly, as we've said. I mean, as they conduct operations in a urban, highly populated environment, they have a concomitant obligation to take care of the civilians that are living there, and the civilians, quite frankly, that are being moved about by the combat operations that are being conducted in a very confined space. They have that obligation.
Are you concerned that aid will be cut off for some period of time now because Jose Andres has said they're
He has said
suspending
that.
operations for a period? The World Food Program is having difficulties. It seems like this incident is exacerbating the crisis.
It certainly isn't helping. There's no question about that. And we obviously respect Chef Andres' decision not to continue operations, at least for a time. Certainly we respect that. And others may make that decision, as you talked about the World Food Program. We're not seeing a wholesale declination here of humanitarian assistance in there. But obviously, yes, that's a concern. The more violent it gets for humanitarian aid workers, and as I said, this is one of the worst in recent history, the less likely it is that they're going to be willing to take those risks, which means it's more likely that the people of Gaza are going to just suffer all the more. So yes, it's a concern.
Thank you, Greg. Secretary Blinken, during his presser in Paris, did not condemn the airstrike, even though, as you confirmed, there was a dual American-Canadian citizen who was killed. The French foreign minister, who was at the same presser, did. You said you're outraged. Why is the U.S. not condemning the strike?
I think by saying we're outraged, I think you can fairly characterize that as condemning the strike itself. Of course. I mean, nobody wants to see this kind of violence happen to humanitarian aid workers who, as was noted earlier, were doing all the right things.
And just to follow up to what...
All right, the White House responding to the death of 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers killed by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. John Kirby says America is looking for a swift, transparent investigation and says that it has urged Israel to be more careful with its operations. We're also learning a little bit more about the victims. A Canadian dual citizen is reported to be among a group of these aid workers killed last night.